verses 11 through 22. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now I am going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Its width, 50 cubits. And its height, 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above, and put the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For my part, I am going to bring a flood of waters on the earth, to destroy from under heaven all flesh in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you, and every living thing of all flesh. You shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, and every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind. 2 of every kind shall come in to you, to keep them alive. Also take with you every kind of food that is eaten, and store it up, and it shall serve as the food for you and them. Noah did this, and he did all that God commanded him. This is the word of the Lord.
Give you all noisemakers. But we'll see how this goes. So in 1872, there was a guy named George Smith who was basically a self-taught kind of amateur archaeologist and historian back when you could do these things. And he was working at the British Museum, and he was working on cataloging and translating some recent artifacts that they had brought in from the Middle East. And most of the translating he was doing on these very, very ancient tablets was things that were basically akin to some kind of like shop's ledger, or recordings of proclamations by important people that don't matter at all in today's world. And so he picks a tablet off the table and starts to translate it, and something very, very different comes out of it. And he starts to translate the story about a time when God set about ridding the earth of human beings through a flood. And the story unfolds that there's a person who God decided was more okay than everybody else and was going to be set aside to save. And that person was instructed to build a giant boat and put 2 of every animal on the boat. And then it talks about the flood. And then after the flood, that animals went out, or that birds were sent out and came back with a branch. And then eventually the water subside and the ark opens, and they offer their praise and sacrifices to God, who saved them. Now, this is a very familiar story, and it was very familiar to him at the time. The challenge was, and the curiosity that he had, was that he was not translating some recently discovered Hebrew manuscript. And in fact, the tablet that he was translating was actually about 800 years older than some of the oldest stuff we have from the Bible. And he wasn't translating from Hebrew; he was translating from cuneiform. And what he was translating was the first time somebody was translating the Epic of Gilgamesh. The flood story, as we know it, is one that actually shows up in a ton of different places. We find it in our Bibles, of course. We also find it in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is several hundred years earlier. There's a Hindu tradition about it. There is actually an ancient Aztec tradition about a flood and somebody who saves things through a boat. This idea about floods and needing to have a place of refuge to save people and animals from it is one that shows up time and time again in human history. which leads some scholars to think something at some point happened that people are remembering and writing down. Now, that is a debate for another day. All right. And so when we approach the Noah story, how we want to approach it or think about it is really sort of kind of up to us, because we live on this side of the history. The important thing about the story, as far as I think we are concerned about it today, is what does the story teach us about God? What does it teach us about people? And what does it teach us about our role in the world, even now? Now, oftentimes when we think about the Noah story, we think about it as almost like a children's story, as a Sunday school story, right? Something you might learn about in Sunday school, because let's be honest, the idea of animals 2 by 2 going into a boat is adorable, right? And we make adorable predictions of it. And when we think of this story, we think of kids because it's just a cute thing. And I don't know how many church nurseries I have seen that are painted up to look like Noah's Ark, which is totally fine, and it's a perfectly wonderful use of the story. But unfortunately, sometimes we can think of these things only in those terms when there's actually so much more here. Right? But it does kind of lend itself to that thing, because animals, and especially adorable animals, because when we think about the ark, we think about the more adorable animals that must have been on it, and we skip that part that Caitlin so ably read about the creepy things. And I do like that they did specifically point out that God instructed Noah to even bring the ugly animals, right? Even the creepy ones that we don't like very much, right? Even they got a spot on the ark. Whenever I'm downstairs in the preschool, there's a theme every year, and oftentimes the theme has animals in it. And when they teach phonics downstairs, it's an animal-based thing for the phonics down there. And so it's just one of those things that we do. Right. The other thing that I am grateful for whenever I get a chance to go down to the preschool, which I try to do a lot because it's such a fun and energizing place to be, is I'm really grateful that I don't work down there, because it would not go well if I did. Right? I'm great with adults for the most part. And it's not that I don't like kids. I love kids. But the amount of patience and time and energy and intentional work that goes in to making sure that the preschool doesn't look like this classroom, which would totally what it would look like if I was in charge down there, just complete and utter chaos. Right? It takes a lot of time and intentional work from all of our staff, just like it does in any classroom anywhere, to make sure that there is at least enough control is maintained, enough order is maintained so that learning can actually happen. Because I don't know if you've gotten to spend a lot of time with a large group of 3 and 4-year-olds, but they have their own ideas about how things should go. They have their own ideas about what they want to be doing at that moment, which may or may not be what you need them to do, at that moment. And the amount of time and care and patience and love that it takes to shower on these kids to maintain an environment that isn't completely overcome by chaos, but instead is a place where people are loved and supported and can grow, cannot be overstated. I cannot tell you how much time and energy I watch in this building, just as I've watched teachers in other classrooms, into preparing for the teaching task, because there is so much to do. Now, I bring that up because this idea of chaos, this idea of what happens when everybody stops listening to everybody else, this idea of what happens when everybody's just interested in doing what they want to do and isn't giving any care or concern to others and what they may want or need, is actually the problem in the Noah story that God is trying to address. In the very, very beginning, in the first chapter of the Bible, we are told that the world started off incredibly chaotic. And the first chapter is the story of God bringing some order to that chaos. The story in Noah, in chapter 6, talks about a people where, unfortunately, the chaos returned. That is the life and the situation of society, of the people that Noah is living with. And one of the ways that we can think about that is Noah is living at a time when people no longer have concern or love for their neighbors, concern or love for what's going on around them. He's living at a time when people are only interested in themselves, their own needs, their own wants. And it is a unfortunate situation that arises. And so God looks down and says, something went terribly wrong here. People have forgotten what we needed them to do. People had forgotten the most important thing, and that idea is they have forgotten what makes people people. Actually, just finished reading a book on the beach while I was gone for my honeymoon called Survival of the Kindest. And the book makes the argument that what actually makes people people, makes civilization possible, puts us at the top of the food chain, isn't that we're stronger than every other animal, because we're not. And it's not that we're smarter than everybody else, but that helps. The thing that makes people people and so successful is we have the capacity to be kind, and we have the capacity to cooperate. We have the capacity to look around and say, I have everything that I need and more than I need, and I am going to choose then to share it with those who don't. Because there may come a time when I need something that I don't have that they do. Our power and our ability to be kind to one another, our ability to cooperate, our ability to function as a group together without descending into self-serving, selfish chaos is what makes us us. And God is looking down at a time when Noah is there and saying that system break down. And so God plucks up Noah, the one who's left. And really not, if we read the story, it's not just Noah, it's Noah and his whole family. So God looks down and sees that there's one person, one family left who still has the capacity to cooperate, that still has the capacity to be kind, who still has the capacity to follow where God wants them to go. And so God grabs that family and asks them to do something that at the time probably sounded crazy. Because we're not entirely certain where Noah was. It doesn't tell us where he was or where he was living, but chances are it wasn't anywhere near a large body of water. So the fact that you would instruct a giant boat of odd proportions, these are not the proportions of a typical boat, and then put all of these different animals into it, no doubt to him and his neighbors looked a bit nuts. But he's willing to do it. He's able to do it. And he very clearly doesn't do it on his own. He and his whole family cooperate to get it done. And because they are willing to do it and build that place and create that space apart from all of the chaos around them, the ark becomes something very important. It is not only that literal thing that all of the animals and the people will hide in, right, when the waters come. The ark becomes something else. It is a place of refuge, and it is a place of hope. And it becomes a set aside place that will carry them through a very difficult time. And if you keep reading in the story, that's what you read, right? And so Noah does go and gather all the people together as he is told, his sons and daughters and his wife, and they gather all the animals together and they take care of them and they feed them, and they're on the boat, and I don't remember exactly how long because I forgot to write it down, but they're on the boat for a long time, right? I know the story tells it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, but they're on the boat a whole lot longer than that because water, once it's that high, doesn't just immediately go away. So they're on the boat for a very, very long time, and they're carried off into somewhere, no doubt, some other place than where they were before. And inside that place, they find the refuge from what's going on outside. Floods are interesting, and they show up a lot in history because they often show up unexpected. One of the things that's been kind of interesting in my house lately is Emily, my new wife, who's also a pastor, if you don't know, she's a pastor down in Denver. We have been comparing notes about our time in ministry, which is an interesting thing to do. And we've both been doing it. I'm doing it like only a couple years longer than she has. We both have a few different appointments under our belts. And so every once in a while, she'll drop a story or I'll drop a story and she'll be like, wait, what? Tell me more about that. And one of the stories I've heard about from her quite a bit was actually the story of her first appointment. And her first appointment was in 2013, fresh out of seminary, in the summer. She was actually pregnant in that summer, so she started that appointment late because her daughter needed to be born. And so instead of like immediately leaving, so she started her appointment late. She started, instead of the normal time, which is July 1, she started August 1, which is coincidentally, I started here on an August 1, kind of an odd time too. But she started August 1 of 2013, being appointed to Lyons, Colorado. Some of you might know what happened in the fall of 2013 in Lyons, Colorado. If you don't, there was this little thing called a flood. And it's one of those things they call like that 500-year or 1,000-year flood where you're just like, great, I have the worst luck ever. But on September 11th, the night of September 11th into the morning of September 12th, people went to bed that night thinking everything was generally okay. Yes, there was a lot of rain. Yes, they were watching the creeks and the rivers in the area, but nobody thought much about it. And then at 11 o'clock, the sirens went off. And then by early that morning, that following morning, the city of Lyons, when everybody went to bed, the city of Lyons, which was one thing, in the morning time was actually 7 individual islands, all cut off from each other because of the floods that came through. 9 people died in the flood. It's the deadliest flood so far in the 21st century in Colorado. And it was 3 days before they had any kind of ability to move people in and out of that area except by helicopter. Interesting things happen when things like this happened. One of the things that happened was a recognition that each one of these newly created islands and Lyons were going to need some way to serve and support one another. And while we want to believe sometimes, and sometimes we're even told sometimes, that when these situations happen, the worst of humanity comes out, what it actually happens almost always is the best does. And one of those islands was in Main Street, and the United Methodist Church in Lyons is the only church on Main Street. And as it happened, Emily lived close enough that she was still on the same island as her church. And so one of the first things that they did is threw open the doors to the church as a place of refuge for people to come that was dry and out of the rain and out of the waters. And they were the first ones to be able to do it. And looking around, they realized it was going to be some time before they were going to get anything else in. And so they weren't sure what to do. So they started what Emily called the give and take system. Basically, they put up this giant board, and if their people heard or knew that they had needs, they would put it on Post-it notes and put it on the needs side of the board. And if people had things more than they needed in some category, maybe they had an extra generator, extra blankets, whatever it is, they would put that on the give side of the board. And volunteers, church members and community members, would see about matching all those people up so that the people who had need and the people who had extra could share with one another. And it worked phenomenally well. And then somebody else noticed and looked around and said, what's going to happen is that the power's off because, the power system isn't designed to work on an island. And so now we have this situation where we have restaurants and homes and all this kind of stuff with perishable food items that aren't going to last very long. So what should we do? I don't know. Let's just cook it all. And so there's large outdoor barbecues, impromptu things outside of restaurants, outside the church popped up, and people brought giant tubs of ice cream that were quickly melting so the kids could devour them, and then brought food and propane grills and all this kind of stuff. And there was somebody was grilling steaks next to the lobster and all this stuff anyway, because it was all just going to go bad. So why hold on to it when I can share it with my neighbor, when I can show some kindness at a time when it needs it, when we can cooperate together? The recovery of the Lyons community took a long time, but was actually accomplished way faster than anybody else expected it to be. And part of the reason why is because it was a smaller, tight-knit community. They knew each other, and they were willing to cooperate and show kindness to one another. We're seeing stories right now just like that out of the hurricanes that just swept through the southeastern United States. And over and over and over again, we see this. The thing I love about that story more than anything is the role that the church ended up playing. The church, by throwing open its doors, became an ark to the people of that community. It became not only a place that was physically dry, like the actual ark, but it became a place of refuge for people who needed it. It became a place of safety for people who needed it, and it became a place of hope for people who needed that as well. Because the church was willing to throw open the doors and invite everybody in and cooperate with anybody who was willing to cooperate with them and show kindness to people they knew and people they didn't, and strangers and new friends and old friends alike, they were fulfilling the same role that Noah and his boat fulfilled so many years before. I love this image of the church because I think that's what we do. Now, we won't all face physical floods, actual floods, though many of us in this room have. It's Colorado. It happens. And when we come to, and the hope is that even when the physical floods come, that we are there to support each other through it. But also when the other things come, when whatever the storms of life that come are, whatever challenges may come into us, whatever tragedies we may come into our lives, my hope and prayer is always that this is a place and we are a people that is willing to embrace, to show kindness, and to work with whoever we need to make sure that none of us ever lose sight of hope. Because the thing that was most preserved, most importantly preserved in the ark, wasn't even actually Noah or the animals or any of it. The thing that was preserved in the ark was the hope that people had that if they were to follow God, follow God's ways, live in the way that God wants us to live, if we were to do that, then we get to be blessed and we get to be the people that God called us to be. And I love at the end of the story, we get the famous bit about the rainbow. That the reason that the rainbow was set in the sky was to remind us that God is with us, that God will be with us when the floodwaters rise and when they subside, when the tragedies happen and when the joys happen, when the challenges come and when the unexpected blessings come. God will always and continue to be with us. And I love that it is a symbol set in the sky that we all get to see. Rich or poor, close or far, wherever we are, whoever we are, whatever we've done, wherever we feel like we are with God, whether we feel really far from God or whether we feel God is standing right next to us, we all can look up and we all get to see the same sign of hope in the sky. And I love that. And I hope for all of us that is still something we think about and see when we see the rainbow. This isn't just a story for kids. It isn't just a cute story about animals going on a boat ride. It is about something far more than that. It is about confronting the reality that sometimes life is really, really hard. And it's about taking hope in the fact that when life is really, really hard, God provides for us, and God will provide for us a place of refuge and hope if we are willing to open our eyes and see it. And then finally, it's a story that challenges us, and challenges especially us as a church to continue and always be that place of refuge and that place of hope for people who are struggling no matter what it is they are struggling with. And that sometimes the people struggling are us. And sometimes we are the ones who need to be reminded of God's grace, the extraordinary lengths God is willing to go for us, and remember the hope that we all have. Amen.